The jungle was alive. The trees whispered in the wind, their leaves rustling like hushed voices sharing secrets. Insects hummed an unending song, and somewhere in the distance, a river murmured over smooth stones. Yet for Ethan, the jungle was a world of terror. He had only turned his back for a second, just long enough to chase a bright blue butterfly, before realizing his parents were gone. The laughter of his little sister, the warmth of his mother's hand in his, vanished. "Mom? Dad?" Ethan's voice trembled as he spun around. The towering trees loomed over him, their branches like twisted arms reaching for the sky. No answer. His breath came fast. He ran in one direction, then another, his small sneakers crunching the damp earth. He tripped over a root and fell, scraping his knee. Pain flared, but the fear swallowing his heart was far worse. "I have to find them. I have to get out of here." The afternoon sun was sinking. Shadows stretched across the jungle floor. Birds called from high above, their cries almost mocking. Ethan wiped his tears, his hands trembling. Then something moved in the undergrowth. A low, rumbling growl sent chills down his spine. Ethan froze. His heart hammered in his chest as two glowing amber eyes emerged from the darkness. A wolf. Ethan had never seen a wolf this close before. He had only seen pictures in books, majestic creatures with thick fur and sharp fangs. But this one was different. Its fur was a deep shade of gray, almost black, with streaks of silver along its back. Its eyes burned like fire. The wolf didn't move. It only watched him, its body still as stone. Ethan's mind screamed at him to run, but his body wouldn't obey. His legs felt like lead. He could barely breathe. Then the wolf took a step closer. Ethan clenched his fists. Was this how he was going to die? Alone in the jungle, devoured by a beast? But the wolf did not attack. It sniffed the air, ears twitching. It took another step, lowering its head slightly as if studying him. Ethan swallowed. His voice came out in a whisper. "Please, don't hurt me." The wolf blinked. Then to Ethan's shock, it turned and started walking away. It paused, looking back at him. It was waiting. Ethan hesitated. Is it leading me somewhere? He had no other choice. Staying here meant death, whether by hunger, wild animals, or the cold night creeping in. He took a shaky step forward. The wolf didn't react, just turned and walked again. Ethan followed. He had no idea that this moment would change his life forever. Ethan followed the wolf through the dense jungle, his small legs struggling to keep up. The creature moved with effortless grace, weaving between trees and stepping over roots as if it knew every inch of the land. Ethan, on the other hand, stumbled and winced with every misstep. The jungle grew darker as the sun sank below the horizon. Strange sounds filled the air, distant roars, rustling leaves, the occasional eerie call of an unseen creature. Ethan's fear gnawed at him, but the wolf never slowed. "Where are you taking me?" he whispered, though he knew the wolf wouldn't answer. The wolf glanced back once, its glowing amber eyes reflecting the dim light. It didn't seem hostile. If anything, there was a strange intelligence in its gaze, as if it understood Ethan's fear. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. A fallen tree lay across a small stream, its bark covered in moss. The wolf padded toward the water and lapped it up. Ethan hesitated, his throat dry and aching. The wolf turned its head, watching him. Then, almost as if it was giving him permission, it stepped aside. Ethan rushed to the stream, cupped his hands, and drank. The water was cool, soothing the burning dryness in his throat. He splashed some on his face, washing away the dirt and sweat. For the first time since getting lost, he felt a glimmer of hope. As he sat on the damp earth, exhaustion weighed on him. His eyelids drooped. The adrenaline that had kept him moving was fading, leaving only aching muscles and overwhelming fatigue. He looked at the wolf. "Are you going to stay?" The wolf didn't move, only watched him. Taking that as a yes, Ethan curled up near the fallen tree, using his arms as a pillow. The wolf lay a few feet away, its ears twitching at every sound. Before sleep claimed him, Ethan whispered, "Thank you." The last thing he saw was the wolf's steady gaze, standing watch in the dark. Ethan woke to the sound of birds chirping. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden patterns on the jungle floor. For a brief moment, he forgot where he was. Then the memories rushed back, getting lost. The wolf, the long trek through the jungle. He sat up quickly and looked around. The wolf was still there, sitting on a rock nearby, its thick fur glistening in the morning light. "You really didn't leave," Ethan murmured. His stomach growled loudly. Hunger gnawed at him, a sharp reminder that he hadn't eaten since yesterday. The wolf stood and stretched before trotting into the trees. "Wait," Ethan called, scrambling to his feet. "Don't leave me alone." The wolf didn't stop. Heart pounding, Ethan followed. They walked deeper into the jungle until the wolf suddenly halted. Its ears perked up, nose twitching. Then in a blur of motion, it pounced into the undergrowth. A flurry of movement, a sharp squeal, and then silence. Ethan stepped closer, heart pounding. The wolf had caught a rabbit. Blood stained its muzzle as it bit down, silencing its prey. Ethan's stomach churned. He turned away, squeezing his eyes shut. "I can't eat that." But then he thought about his parents, his sister, the life he wanted to get back to. If he didn't eat, he wouldn't survive long enough to find them. He turned back around, his voice barely above a whisper. Can I have some?" The wolf stared at him for a long moment. Then, to Ethan's surprise, it tore a piece of meat from the rabbit and nudged it toward him. Ethan hesitated before picking it up. His hand shook as he brought it to his mouth. He had never eaten raw meat before, but he had no fire to cook it. The first bite was strange, chewy, metallic, but his hunger won over his discomfort. He ate slowly, forcing himself to keep it down. The wolf watched him, then continued eating its share. For the first time, Ethan realized, this wolf wasn't just keeping him safe, it was teaching him. The days blurred together. Ethan and the wolf, whom he had silently named Shadow, became an unlikely pair. Shadow never spoke, but his actions did. He taught Ethan where to find water, how to recognize edible plants, and how to move silently through the jungle without attracting predators. Ethan learned quickly. He used rocks to crack open nuts, leaves to collect rainwater, and his bare hands to dig up roots. Each lesson Shadow provided felt like a lifeline, tying him closer to the world he once feared. But the hunger never fully went away. Hunting still made his stomach churn, but he had learned to accept it. He was no longer just a lost boy. He was surviving. At night, they slept close, Ethan against a tree, Shadow curled nearby, his thick fur a comfort against the night's chill. One night, as Ethan lay awake beneath the canopy of stars, he whispered, "You had a pack once, didn't you?" Shadow's ears twitched, but he didn't move. Ethan stared into the darkness. I think I get it now. You were alone too." Shadow let out a soft huff. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a sigh. It was something in between, an acknowledgement. Ethan smiled. "I guess we found each other, huh?" For the first time since getting lost, he felt safe. The next morning, something felt wrong. The jungle was too quiet. The usual symphony of birds and insects had vanished. The air felt thick, heavy with an unspoken tension. Shadow had noticed it too. He stood alert, his body rigid, ears flicking at every sound. Ethan's heart pounded. "What is it?" Then a sharp crack. Not a twig snapping, not an animal moving. A gunshot. Shadow snarled, his fur bristling. Ethan ducked behind a tree, his breath coming fast. People. For the first time, hope surged in him. "It's humans. Maybe they can help me." Shadow let out a low growl. Ethan hesitated. "What?" Then he saw them. 3 men moving through the jungle, dressed in dark clothes, rifles slung over their shoulders. Their boots crushed the earth beneath them without care. They weren't looking for a lost boy. They were hunting. Shadow stepped in front of Ethan, his body tense, protective. Ethan swallowed hard. His chest tightened as the realization hit him. They're after Shadow. His mind raced. If the poachers saw them, they wouldn't think twice. They'd kill Shadow, and maybe him too. I have to do something. But what could he do against armed men? Shadow let out a soft growl, nudging Ethan backward. "Run," his eyes seemed to say. Ethan shook his head. "Not without you." The men were getting closer. One of them raised his rifle, scanning the trees. They had seconds to decide. Ethan grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it behind them. The noise made the men whip around, aiming their guns in the wrong direction. Shadow didn't hesitate. He bolted, nudging Ethan to follow. They ran, through the trees, over roots, across the stream. Gunshots rang out. Ethan's lungs burned, his legs screaming in protest. But he couldn't stop. Not now. A shout came from behind. "It's a black wolf! That's the one we want!" Ethan's heart sank. They knew about Shadow. He risked a glance back. The poachers were chasing them, but they weren't fast enough. Shadow and Ethan vanished into the jungle. Ethan and Shadow ran until his legs could carry him no further. His lungs burned, his heart pounded, but he didn't dare stop until they were deep within the jungle, hidden beneath a thick canopy. Finally, when he couldn't take another step, Ethan collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. Shadow stood beside him, ears still perked, his body rigid. He was listening, waiting. Ethan pressed his forehead against his knees. Poachers, real ones, the kind he had read about in stories, the kind who killed animals for sport. And they wanted Shadow. A deep anger burned in his chest. Shadow had saved him, more than once. Now it was his turn. He lifted his head and looked at the wolf. "We have to stop them." Shadow blinked, watching him carefully. Ethan bit his lip. He wasn't a warrior, wasn't strong. He was just a kid. But he knew the jungle now. He knew how to move through it, how to hide, how to survive. And he had something the poachers didn't. Shadow. An idea formed in his mind. A trap. Ethan spent the next few hours gathering what he could. He collected sharp stones, twisted vines into makeshift ropes, and dug shallow pits in the undergrowth. He remembered what Shadow had taught him, how to use the jungle, not fight against it. Shadow watched, occasionally tilting his head as if questioning Ethan's strange human ways. Ethan wiped his sweaty hands on his torn shirt and turned to Shadow. "Now we just have to lure them in." Shadow blinked, his amber eyes studying Ethan. Then, as if he understood, he let out a low huff. Ethan's plan was risky, but it was their only chance. He would use himself as bait, make noise, let the poachers think they had cornered him, while Shadow led them straight into the traps. It had to work. Ethan crept through the undergrowth until he was within earshot of the poachers. They had set up a small camp, talking in hushed voices while one of them cleaned his rifle. "That black wolf is worth a fortune," one of them muttered. "The boss wants it alive, but if we have to put a bullet in it, so be it." Ethan's fist clenched. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed a large rock and hurled it at a metal box near the camp. The loud clangs shattered the silence. "What was that?" one of the men shouted. Ethan stepped into the open, heart pounding. "Hey!" The men froze. For a moment, they just stared. Then one of them pointed. "That's not an animal. That's a kid." Ethan turned and bolted. "Get him!" Heavy footsteps pounded behind him. Ethan ran as fast as he could, weaving between trees, jumping over roots. The jungle blurred around him. Shadow was already in position, waiting. Ethan darted past the first hidden trap, a shallow pit covered in leaves. A second later, a loud thud and a yelp of pain signaled that one poacher had fallen in. "One down," Ethan muttered under his breath. The second poacher kept coming. Ethan raced forward, leading him toward a tripwire made from vines. The man didn't see it. His foot caught, and he crashed hard into the ground, his rifle flying from his hands. Only one left. Ethan ducked behind a tree, his heart pounding. Where was the third guy? Then, a cold hand grabbed his arm. "Got you?" Ethan struggled, kicking and thrashing, but the man was strong. "Thought you could outsmart us, huh?" He sneered, yanking Ethan closer. "Where's the wolf?" A deep growl rumbled behind them. The poacher stiffened. Slowly, he turned his head. Shadow stood just a few feet away, his fur bristling, lips curled back to reveal razor-sharp fangs. His amber eyes burned with fury. The poacher swallowed. "Easy now!" Shadow lunged. The man let go of Ethan just in time to throw himself backward. Shadow didn't attack. He didn't have to. His presence alone sent the poacher scrambling away. Ethan grabbed the fallen rifle and pointed it at the man. "Leave! Now!" The poacher hesitated, eyeing Shadow warily. Then, realizing he was outmatched, he turned and ran. The jungle swallowed him whole. Ethan let out a shaky breath. His hands trembled as he dropped the rifle. It was over. Shadow stepped closer, nudging Ethan's arm. "We did it," Ethan whispered. He looked at the wolf and smiled. "We won." The next morning, Ethan and Shadow stood at the edge of the jungle. In the distance, a dirt road wound through the trees, leading back to civilization. Ethan knew this was his chance. If he followed the road, he would find help. He would find his family. But his heart ached at the thought of leaving Shadow behind. The wolf stared at him, his eyes unreadable. Ethan took a deep breath. "You should come with me." Shadow didn't move. "You saved my life. More than once. We could stay together." Still, Shadow stood firm. Ethan's throat tightened. He understood. Shadow belonged here. This was his home. Tears welled in his eyes, but he fought them back. He reached out, hesitated, then placed a gentle hand on Shadow's head. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Shadow let out a soft, rumbling sound, almost like a sigh. Then, without another sound, he turned and disappeared into the jungle. Ethan watched until he was gone. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped onto the road and walked toward home. But he knew, no matter where life took him, he would never forget the wolf who saved him, the wolf who became his guardian. If you enjoy this story, please like and share with your friends. Also, subscribe this channel to watch more furry and amazing stories. Love you all.